I'm Corbin Horn. I'm a senior specialist and the director of Hindman's sales of European furniture and decorative arts across all of our offices in the United States, and this is Sips with a Specialist. I'm very excited to tell you about this white marble bust, which is the work of 19th century sculptor Larkin Goldsmith Mead. Larkin Mead worked in Italy in the Neoclassic style, and Neoclassicism, as you know, was the movement in literature, music, architecture, and the decorative arts that was inspired by the politics, art, and culture of ancient Greece and Rome. This style became fashionable first in the 1760s, roughly, around the same time as the rediscovery of Pompeii and Herculaneum, but it was also both a response to and a rebellion against the Rococo style, which had prevailed in architecture and the decorative arts until then. Larkin Mead was born in Vermont, or maybe New Hampshire, depending on who you ask. He was the son of a prominent attorney, but he lived in New York for a time working as the student of sculptor Henry Kirk Brown. He also worked as an illustrator for Harper's Weekly before he found success as a sculptor in wood and marble. His first and probably most successful commission was his sculpture of Ceres, which stood atop the Vermont State Building for many years. He's also pretty famous for having designed the tomb of Abraham Lincoln at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois. So from 1862 to about 1865, Larkin Mead lived in Venice, where he stayed with his brother-in-law, who was working at the American consulate in Venice. That's also when he met his wife, Marietta di Benvenuti, and he would go on to immortalize his wife in what is probably his most famous sculpture called Venezia. It's a depiction of his wife personified as the city of Venice. Hindman sold this version of Venezia several years ago. Throughout his career, Larkin Mead would return to the United States pretty regularly, and in 1893 he won the very prestigious job of designing the decoration of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago at the fair's Agriculture Building. What you might not know is that Mead's brother was named William Randolph Mead, and he was the Mead of the famous architecture firm McKim, Mead, and White. McKim, Mead, and White, of course, designed neoclassic buildings all throughout the United States and many buildings in Chicago and at the 1893 World's Fair. After he lived in Venice, Larkin Mead moved on to Florence, which was a haven for expatriate sculptors working during this period, mainly because there was so much readily available Carrara and other marbles to work in as a sculptor, but also because there was lots of affordable labor and an endless amount of inspiration for artists from the Uffizi and other galleries around Florence, as well as archaeological sites throughout Italy. Here is a New York Times story that I found from 1864 about American artists finding success abroad in Italy and other places. I love this bust. It simply does not get more neoclassic than this sculpture. We don't think that it's a portrait of any specific figure from Athens or Rome, but rather it's an amalgamation of the facial features of every famous ruler from Athens and Rome. The forehead has a cowlick in the hair, which you can see here at the front. This is an obvious reference to what we know Alexander the Great to have looked like. I can also point out that the nose has an aquiline shape, which is more commonly known as a Roman nose. The word aquiline, of course, comes from the Latin for eagle-like. It is a trait in one's nose that has been thought of as a noble trait throughout Europe. Larkin Mead, I am thinking, must have wandered the Uffizi Gallery looking for inspiration, and instead of copying the face of one specific character, he was left with a vague impression of the face of every bust that he saw. And it resulted in this work, which to me is a sublimely realistic representation of the ancient world, but seen through the eyes of a 19th century sculptor. This bust comes to us from the collection of Mary Jane Kurtz in St. Louis, Missouri. We don't know much about its provenance before that, but we know that Mrs. Kurtz bought the bust in New York sometime in 1953. So this is this sculpture's first time being offered at auction in nearly 70 years. I hope you will join me on April 21st in Chicago to see what it brings, and join us here again in 2 weeks for another Sips with a Specialist.